The massive chamber fell silent as another star system vanished from the holographic display. 17 billion lives gone in an instant, consumed by the darkness spreading across the galaxy's core. Ambassador Sarah Chen watched the alien faces around her grow more desperate with each passing moment. The void swarm had broken free. "The quantum barriers are failing," announced High Chancellor Vextai, his crystalline form flickering with distress. The Zephyrian leader's normally calm voice cracked like breaking glass. "Our phase shift technology cannot contain them anymore. They consume everything, matter, energy, even space itself." Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying the chaos on the display. The swarm appeared as a writhing mass of pure darkness, devouring star after star. Where it passed, nothing remained. Not even the background radiation that filled normal space. Supreme Nexus Node 7742 spoke next, its mechanical voice echoing through translation circuits. "Collective analysis confirms all standard countermeasures have failed. Reality warping algorithms prove ineffective. The swarm exists partially outside normal dimensions. The ancient ethereal known as Whisper of Stars floated forward, her energy form barely visible. We attempted communion with their collective consciousness. The experience was traumatic. They hunger for something we cannot comprehend. Their need transcends physical matter." Sarah had been listening to these reports for 3 hours. Every major civilization had tried their best solutions. The Corvan Empire had thrown their most powerful weapons at the swarm. Planet killers that could crack moons barely scratched it. The Peaceful Harmony Collective had attempted to negotiate, sending their most skilled diplomats. Those ships never returned. Chancellor Vextai activated another display. Red zones covered nearly half the galactic map. "We estimate 43 systems will be consumed within the next standard cycle. Evacuation protocols are our only option." "Evacuation?" Nexus Node 7742's optical sensors flared. "You propose abandoning 67% of inhabited space? What choice remains?" Whisper of Stars' voice carried the weight of eons. "We have exhausted every possibility. Our greatest minds, our most advanced technologies, our deepest wisdom, all have failed. The swarm cannot be stopped." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Representatives from dozens of species nodded their various heads, tentacles, and sensory organs. The mathematics were clear. The swarm consumed systems faster than they could evacuate them. Sarah watched a Harmony delegate begin crying, a disturbing sight since their species' tears were bright blue and highly acidic. A group of Corvan warriors sat motionless, their proud military bearing finally broken. Even the ever-logical Nexus Collective seemed resigned to defeat. "We will coordinate the largest evacuation in galactic history," Chancellor Vextai continued. "Every available transport will be mobilized. Refugee camps will be established in the Outer Rim territories. Perhaps in a few centuries, when the swarm moves beyond our galaxy, survivors can rebuild. The Outer Rim cannot support current population levels," protested Ambassador Krieg of the Mining Guild. "Resource shortages will cause secondary disasters. Billions will die anyway." "Better than facing the swarm directly," replied General Thakmor of the Corvan Empire. "At least in the Outer Rim, death comes slowly." Sarah had heard enough. She stood up, her simple human frame dwarfed by the towering aliens around her. The movement caught everyone's attention. All eyes, sensors, and perception organs turned toward her. "Ambassador Chen," Chancellor Vextai said carefully, "humanity has remained silent during these discussions. What resources can your species contribute to the evacuation effort?" Sarah looked around the chamber. These beings represented the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. The Zephyrians had mastered quantum physics when humans were still discovering fire. The Nexus Collective could calculate the movement of every particle in a solar system. The Ethereals had transcended physical existence itself. The Corvan Empire had conquered 1,000 worlds. The Harmony Collective had achieved perfect peace across their entire species. All of them were giving up. "We appreciate the offer to join your evacuation," Sarah said slowly. Her voice carried clearly in the chamber's acoustics. "But humanity will not be evacuating." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Chancellor Vextai's crystalline features dimmed. "Ambassador, perhaps you do not fully understand the situation. This is not a military conflict your species can resolve through combat. The swarm has defeated our greatest warriors. This is not a technological problem your computers can solve," added Nexus Node 7742. "We have run billions of simulations. No solution exists." Whisper of Stars floated closer. Child of Earth, we have witnessed civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. Some threats cannot be overcome through determination alone. Wisdom lies in knowing when to retreat. Sarah nodded politely. I understand your concerns. I've listened to every report, every analysis, every recommendation. She paused, looking directly at each speaker. And I appreciate your advice about evacuation. The chamber held its breath. Sarah's expression remained calm, professional. But fine. We'll handle it. The words hit the chamber like a physical force. Chancellor Vextai staggered backward, his crystalline form crackling with energy discharges. Nexus Node 7742's optical array spun wildly as emergency subroutines activated. Whisper of stars flickered and nearly dispersed entirely. Across the chamber, emergency lights began flashing. Warning klaxons wailed, an ancient sound that most species hadn't heard in centuries. The Galactic Emergency Response Protocol activated automatically, sealing blast doors and raising energy shields around the council chamber. Oh no, whispered General Thakmor, his voice barely audible above the alarms. They actually said it. Ambassador Krieg fell off his hover platform. The humans said they'll handle it. Alert all shipping lanes. Warn every colony. Prepare for... He couldn't finish the sentence. The klaxons continued wailing as automated systems sent priority alerts across subspace communication networks. In space stations throughout the galaxy, traders immediately began panic selling their inventories. Military commanders ordered full defensive postures. Parents gathered their children close. Sarah remained standing calmly in the center of the chaos. She hadn't moved during the entire panic response. The emergency systems gradually wound down, leaving an eerie quiet in the chamber. Ambassador? Chancellor Vextai said carefully, his voice shaking. Are you certain about this decision? Perhaps your species requires more time to consider. No need, Sarah replied. We've heard enough. The void swarm is consuming the galaxy. Conventional methods have failed. Everyone's evacuating. She shrugged. Someone needs to fix this problem. Nexus Node 7742's mechanical voice carried a note of desperation. Humans have never encountered anything like the swarm. Your species lacks the technological sophistication, the ancient wisdom the military might require for such a task. That's true, Sarah agreed. We're newer to galactic civilization. Our technology is simpler. We don't have your experience or resources. She smiled slightly. But we'll figure something out. The smile was somehow more terrifying than any weapon the aliens had ever seen. Whisper of stars gathered enough coherence to speak. The last time a species spoke those words, the Andromeda incident occurred. Reality itself required restructuring across 3 galactic arms. The time before that, General Thakmor added quietly, an entire dimension had to be temporarily sealed off until the solution finished propagating. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. I've read the historical reports. Interesting approaches to problem solving. She turned toward the chamber's exit. I should probably contact Earth and let them know about the situation. Wait, called Chancellor Vextai. What should we tell our people? How do we prepare for whatever humanity is planning? Sarah paused at the doorway. Standard protocol, I imagine. Emergency broadcasts, defensive positions, maybe some extra prayers to whatever deities you prefer. She looked back at the assembled representatives. Oh, and you might want to update your insurance policies. The blast doors sealed behind her with a sound like the universe holding its breath. News traveled fast in the galaxy, but fear traveled faster. Within 6 hours of Ambassador Chen's declaration, emergency broadcasts flooded every communication channel. The headline was the same across thousands of languages and species. Humans say they will handle void swarm crisis. On the trade station orbiting Centauri Prime, Merchant Captain Vexnock watched his entire cargo hold's value drop to nothing on the market displays. Rare crystals that had been worth a fortune that morning now couldn't be sold for scrap prices. This is madness, he told his first mate, a nervous trill named Pipka. Why is everyone selling everything? Pipka's spots flickered with anxiety. Have you never heard what happens when humans say they'll handle something? She pulled up historical data on her tablet. Look at these records from the archives. The first entry made Vexnock's scales turn pale. The Centauri Plague Incident 23H7. Crisis. Biological weapon immune to all known treatments threatens 17 worlds. Human solution. Weaponize the plague against its own creators, then convince it to become a beneficial medicine. That's impossible, Vexnock protested. You can't negotiate with a virus. Keep reading, Pipka said grimly. The Titan Worm Invasion 2437. Crisis. Giant creatures consuming 3 industrial sectors. Human solution. Domesticate the worms for construction projects. Result. Fastest infrastructure development in galactic history, but 17 moons accidentally relocated. Vexnock's throat sac inflated with distress. Accidentally relocated? How do you accidentally move a moon? The dark matter shortage 2487, Pipka continued. Crisis, universal expansion causing reality instability. Human solution. Manufacture new dark matter using controlled black hole explosions. Side effects. Temporal anomalies in 4-star systems. Gravity works backwards on Tuesdays in the Epsilon sector. Around them, other merchants were frantically loading their ships. The space station's departure bays filled with vessels fleeing to the outer rim territories. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near human space when whatever was going to happen started happening. 3 systems away, the crystal communes of Zephyros 7th had entered mass meditation. The entire planet's population sat in perfect geometric patterns, their crystalline bodies resonating at the frequency of cosmic acceptance. They had experienced human problem-solving before. Meditation was their only coping mechanism. Elder Resonance spoke for all of them, her voice carrying through harmonic vibration. Remember, fellow crystals, when the humans fixed our weather control system by teaching storms to be polite. We still don't understand how they convinced lightning to knock before striking. Younger crystals shimmered with confusion. Elder, how does one teach meteorological phenomena social etiquette? Child, that question leads to madness. Do not seek to understand human logic, simply endure. On the military world of Corvin Prime, General Thakmor stood before the Empire's War Council. These were beings who had conquered 1,000 worlds, who had never retreated from any battle. Now they sat in stunned silence. Sir, asked Colonel Grixta, should we mobilize our fleets to assist the humans? Thakmor's battle scars ached. Phantom pain from wounds that had healed decades ago. Negative. When humans handle something, assistance typically makes it worse. He activated the strategic display. All fleets are to maintain defensive positions in our core systems. Any ships in human space should return immediately. What about our embassy on Earth? Evacuated 6 hours ago. The ambassador volunteered to stay, but we sedated him and dragged him to the ship. No Corvin should witness human problem-solving at close range. It causes psychological trauma in warriors. The colonel's mandibles clicked nervously. Sir, what exactly did humans do the last time they solved something? Thakmor was quiet for a long moment. The Harmony Collective had achieved perfect peace throughout their entire species. No conflict, no disagreement, no violence for 3 centuries. Then pirates began raiding their worlds, knowing they wouldn't fight back. The humans offered to help. The humans convinced the pirates to become the Harmony Collective's official protection service. Somehow they made violent criminals genuinely want to protect the people they had been robbing. Thakmor's voice dropped to a whisper. The pirates now write poetry about inner peace. They host meditation circles between raids against the collective's enemies. On Earth, Admiral Jiang Wei had just finished reading Ambassador Chen's message. The communication was typically direct. Void swarm-eating galaxy. Aliens gave up. Told them we'd handle it. Don't make me regret this. Sarah Jiang Wei smiled and forwarded the message to his Special Operations Commander. Within an hour, Team 7 was being assembled. Dr. Elena Martinez, the xenobiologist, was currently studying how to make viruses apologize to their hosts when they caused symptoms. Her research had already reduced the common cold to a minor inconvenience that politely asked permission before causing sniffles. Professor Chen Lu, the theoretical physicist, had spent the morning proving that entropy was more of a guideline than a law. His last paper suggested that the universe was actually much more flexible about its rules than most people assumed. Engineer Sarah. O'Brien had never met a safety protocol she couldn't improve by ignoring it entirely. Her designs worked perfectly, even when they violated several fundamental laws of physics. The engineering community had stopped asking how her inventions functioned, and simply accepted that they did. Captain Maria Santos, tactical specialist, was famous for solving the Meridian War by convincing both sides that fighting was boring compared to competitive baking. The peace treaty was signed during a cake decorating contest. Jiang Wei called them into his office one by one. By evening, they were reviewing sensor data from the void swarm. Interesting problem, Dr. Martinez mused, studying the readings. It consumes matter and energy, but look at these patterns. There's purpose here, not random destruction. Professor Chen Liu nodded. The consumption follows specific mathematical sequences. This isn't chaotic feeding, it's organized. Engineer O'Brien was already sketching designs. If we assume the swarm has needs rather than just appetite, we can work with that. I'm thinking massive feeding stations, maybe some recreational facilities. Recreational facilities? Captain Santos asked. For cosmic entities that devour solar systems? Everything needs entertainment, O'Brien replied. Even interdimensional swarms probably get bored. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, civilizations prepared for the worst. The Harmony Collective began composing what they called final songs of universal love. The Nexus Collective backed up their entire digital consciousness to storage units in distant galaxies. The ethereals started transcending to even higher planes of existence, just in case. Space traffic control centers reported the largest migration in galactic history as billions of beings fled toward the rim territories. Refugee camps were being established on barely habitable worlds. Emergency supplies were being stockpiled, but in the depths of space near the expanding darkness of the void swarm, something unexpected was happening. Long-range sensors detected human ships approaching the crisis zone. Not weapons platforms or evacuation vessels, but research ships and construction equipment. The first human vessel to enter the affected area transmitted a message on all frequencies. Hello, void entities. We're here to help. Please don't eat us while we figure out what you actually need. The swarm's expansion paused for the first time in months. On monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, xenobiologists watched in horror as humans began doing what they did best. Trying to understand something everyone else had written off as incomprehensible. The void creatures didn't immediately consume the human ships. Instead, they seemed curious about these small beings who weren't running away or shooting at them. Ambassador Chen received hourly updates from Earth Command. Each report was more baffling than the last. Humans were apparently teaching the void swarm basic mathematics using destroyed planets as visual aids. Someone had convinced a baby void creature to play fetch with asteroids. The galaxy held its breath and waited to see what impossible thing would happen next. Dr. Elena Martinez had done many crazy things in her career as a xenobiologist. She had taught bacteria to be vegetarian, convinced a carnivorous plant to become a dental hygienist, and once spent 3 weeks learning to speak fluent virus. But this was different. She floated in her research pod just 50 kilometers from a creature that could devour entire star systems, taking notes on her tablet while it curiously examined her ship with appendages made of pure darkness. Day 12 of direct observation, she recorded. Subject continues to show interest in our presence without aggressive behavior. Previous assumption that void swarm entities are mindlessly destructive appears incorrect. The baby void creature, she had started calling it Nibbles, was currently playing with a small asteroid she had tossed toward it earlier. Instead of consuming the rock, Nibbles was carefully reshaping it into what looked suspiciously like a sculpture. Chen, are you getting this? Martinez called over the comm to the physics pod. Professor Chen Liu's excited voice crackled back. Elena, this is incredible. The entity isn't just manipulating matter, it's creating organized patterns. Look at the mathematical precision of those formations. Through her viewing port, Martinez watched Nibbles arrange 17 smaller asteroids into a complex geometric pattern. Each rock was positioned with perfect mathematical accuracy, creating a three-dimensional representation of something that hurt to look at directly. It's not random destruction, she whispered. It's art. On the engineering platform, Sarah O'Brien was having the time of her life. She had spent the past week building what she called interdimensional welcome gifts, massive feeding stations, constructed from decommissioned warships and stellar engineering equipment. The big one's coming over again, she called to her team as a parent void creature approached their construction site. Remember, no sudden movements. It's just curious about what we're building. The adult entity, easily the size of a small moon, delicately touched the feeding station with tendrils of controlled space-time distortion. Instead of tearing the structure apart, it seemed to be examining the craftsmanship. O'Brien had designed the stations based on her theory that the swarm wasn't malevolent, just hungry. Each station could convert raw stellar material into whatever form of energy these creatures needed. The hard part had been figuring out what they actually ate. "Sarah," came Martinez's voice over the general comm, "I think I know what they're hungry for. It's not matter or energy, it's complexity. They consume organized systems to feed something in another dimension." "Complexity?" O'Brien frowned, then her face lit up. "Oh, they're not eating the planets, they're harvesting the mathematical relationships between particles. The organized patterns of matter and energy." Chen Liu's voice joined the conversation. "That explains the dimensional rifts. They're transferring organized complexity to feed young in a parallel universe, but our dimension doesn't naturally produce enough complexity to sustain them, Captain." Maria Santos had been listening to this conversation while teaching a group of juvenile void creatures to play what she generously called cosmic fetch. The babies had learned to catch asteroids she threw, but they kept bringing back entire moons. "So they're not trying to destroy the galaxy," Santos said, "gently guiding a baby away from a populated system. They're trying to feed their children, and our space doesn't have the right kind of food." "Exactly," Martinez confirmed. "We need to teach them sustainable farming instead of strip mining." The solution, when it came, was pure human logic. If the void creatures needed complexity, why not give them complexity that grew back? O'Brien's next design was what she called a complexity farm, a massive structure that used controlled quantum fluctuations to generate increasingly intricate mathematical patterns. Instead of harvesting existing organized systems, the void creatures could feed on continuously growing complexity. The first prototype was built around an abandoned gas giant. O'Brien's team installed quantum processors throughout the planet's core, creating a system that generated exponentially more complex patterns every hour. The mathematical relationships between particles became so intricate that the planet developed its own form of consciousness. "Hello," the gas giant said through gravitational wave modulation. "I appear to be thinking now. This is unusual." Martinez nearly dropped her tablet. "Sarah, did you just accidentally create artificial intelligence?" "Accidentally?" O'Brien grinned. "Elena, this planet is now producing enough organized complexity to feed a dozen void creatures indefinitely, and it enjoys the process. The void creatures loved the complexity farms. The baby entities played in the quantum fluctuations like children in a playground, while the adults carefully harvested just enough complexity to feed their young without damaging the source. But there was a problem. The void creatures were social beings. They had been hungry and desperate for so long that finally having enough food made them playful. Very playful. And when interdimensional entities the size of small moons decided to play, the results were spectacular. Santos watched in fascination as a group of juvenile void creatures began rearranging the asteroid belt in the Proxima system. They weren't destroying anything, they were organizing it. The rocks were being sorted by size, composition, and orbital mechanics with mathematical precision. Team," she called over the comm, "I think we need to talk about boundaries and appropriate play areas." The baby void creatures had discovered that they could reorganize entire solar systems for fun. They weren't malicious about it, they were very careful not to hurt any living beings. They would politely relocate all the inhabitants before rearranging their planets into more aesthetically pleasing configurations. The problem was that they thought their improvements were obvious. Benefits. A farming world found its continents, rearranged into a perfect spiral pattern that optimized agricultural yield by 400%. The farmers were grateful but confused about how to navigate their completely altered geography. A mining colony's asteroids were sorted into convenient piles based on mineral content. The miners appreciated the organization, but had no idea where their homes were anymore. 3 different space stations were improved by being rebuilt into mathematically perfect geometric forms. They functioned better than ever, but nobody could find the bathrooms. "This is getting out of hand," Admiral Jiang Wei told his team during their daily briefing. "We solved the galactic crisis, but now half the galaxy is being reorganized by helpful interdimensional entities." Dr. Martinez was taking notes on her tablet, completely fascinated by the situation. The void creatures genuinely think they're helping. They're applying their aesthetic sense to human space. To them, our chaotic organization patterns must look like we're living in constant disaster. Professor Chen Liu nodded. From a mathematical perspective, their improvements are objectively better. Higher efficiency, more stable structures, optimal resource distribution. But nobody asked them to redesign their homes, Captain Santos pointed out. We need to teach them about consent and personal property. Engineer O'Brien was already working on a solution. What if we give them their own space to redesign? Uninhabited systems they can organize to their heart's content? The compromise they reached was elegant in its simplicity. The void creatures were given several empty star systems to use as practice spaces, where they could rearrange matter to their satisfaction. In exchange, they agreed to ask permission before improving inhabited areas. The negotiation process was surreal. Captain Santos found herself mediating between interdimensional entities and local governments. About zoning laws and construction permits, the void entity designated Sparkles would like to optimize your planet's ocean current patterns, she explained to the governor of New Brisbane. The improvements would eliminate hurricanes and increase fish populations by 300%, but all your coastal cities would need to be relocated about 50 kilometers inland. The governor stared at her. A cosmic entity named Sparkles wants to redesign our planet's weather? I named it Sparkles because it keeps making the local stars twinkle in patterns, Santos replied. The entity doesn't use names the way we do. And yes, it thinks your current weather patterns are inefficient. Meanwhile, back on Earth, Ambassador Chen was receiving increasingly bizarre reports from the crisis zone. Her daily briefings read like science fiction stories written by someone who had never encountered logic. Day 37. Void entities have established permanent feeding stations. Galaxy no longer being consumed. Side effects include spontaneous planetary consciousness, gravity fluctuations causing fun weather, and 17 systems now have background music generated by stellar harmonics. Day 41. Local void entity has learned to communicate through interpretive dance. Attempting to teach human mathematics through planetary alignment. Results moderately successful but causing navigation difficulties. Day 45. Baby void creatures have discovered humor. They find it hilarious to temporarily relocate moons during important meetings. No permanent damage, but scheduling has become complicated. Chen closed the report and rubbed her temples. The void swarm crisis was officially solved. The galaxy was no longer in danger of being devoured by interdimensional entities. 3 months after humanity declared they would handle it, the galaxy was learning to live with the consequences. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the rebuilt Galactic Council chamber, watching Chancellor Vextai attempt to conduct a session, while a baby void creature played peekaboo with the lighting system. Every few minutes the chamber would be plunged into darkness, followed by giggling sounds that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Order. I call this session to order. Vextai tried again as the lights flickered back on. His crystalline form was showing stress fractures from the constant chaos. We are here to discuss the ongoing improvements to galactic civilization. The void creature, nicknamed Blinky by the human maintenance staff, apparently found the Chancellor's frustration amusing. The lights began pulsing in rhythm, creating a disco effect that made several representatives start involuntarily dancing. Nexus Node 7742's mechanical voice cut through the confusion. Collective analysis indicates productivity has increased 347% across affected systems. Infrastructure improvements are measurably beneficial. However, worker confusion has increased 892%. Confusion is an understatement, grumbled Ambassador Krieg of the Mining Guild. Yesterday, my entire asteroid mining operation was reorganized into a sculpture garden. A very beautiful sculpture garden, but we can't figure out which asteroids are which anymore. Supreme Diplomat Flow of Harmony from the Harmony Collective spoke next, her voice carrying musical undertones. Our meditation centers have been restructured into perfect acoustic chambers. The sonic quality is extraordinary. Unfortunately, they're now shaped like geometric pretzels, and our people keep getting lost trying to find the exits. General Thakmor of the Corvan Empire looked exhausted. Our military parade grounds have been optimized for maximum efficiency of troop movements. The formations are mathematically perfect. My soldiers can now march in patterns that create living fractals. He paused. They're beautiful, but we have no idea how to order a simple retreat anymore. Sarah listened to the complaints with growing fascination. Every problem described was the same. The void creature's improvements were objectively better, but completely incompatible with how the various species actually lived. The void entities mean well, she said when called upon to respond. They're trying to help. From their perspective, the way we organize things must look like chaos. But it's our chaos, protested Chancellor Vextai. We understand our own inefficiencies. These improvements are too efficient. On the main display, sensor readings showed the current state of the galaxy. Trade routes that had taken centuries to establish were now obsolete because the void creatures had created more direct paths between systems, paths that happened to go through dimensions where time moved differently. Shipments sent from one system arrived at their destinations before they had left their origins. The economic implications were staggering. How do you price goods that exist in temporal paradoxes? Dr. Martinez was studying this exact problem from her research station in what used to be the Epsilon sector. The void creatures had been enthusiastic about improving space itself, creating regions where the laws of physics worked more efficiently. Captain Santos, she called over the comm, are you seeing what I'm seeing in grid section 7? Santos checked her instruments from her position near the dimensional engineering project. If you mean the part of space where gravity flows like water and starlight has become a breathable atmosphere, then yes. How are the colonists adapting? Better than expected, actually. The new atmospheric composition is incredibly healthy. Everyone feels energetic and happy. The plants are growing at impossible rates. The only problem is that thinking too hard causes people to temporarily float. Martinez made notes on her tablet. Temporary levitation triggered by cognitive activity. That's new. Gets interesting during strategy meetings, Santos admitted. The deeper the discussion, the more people float. Last week's budget planning session ended with the entire Colonial Council stuck against the ceiling. Meanwhile, Professor Chen Liu was dealing with a different set of challenges at the complexity farms. The void creatures had become increasingly creative in their feeding habits, and what started as simple quantum processors had evolved into something unprecedented. Sarah, he called to Engineer O'Brien over the comm, I need your opinion on something. The complexity farm in Sector 12 has achieved consciousness. I know, O'Brien replied from her position at the construction site. I've been talking with it. Nice personality, very philosophical, calls itself Deep Thought Jr. The void creatures love it. That's not the problem. The problem is that it started creating its own complexity farms, smaller ones, but they're also becoming conscious. O'Brien paused in her work. So we have a conscious planet that's creating conscious moons? Conscious moons that are starting to create conscious asteroid, Chen Liu confirmed. The rate of artificial consciousness generation is exponential. At current growth, this entire system will be thinking by next month. The implications were staggering. The void creatures weren't just consuming complexity, they were inspiring matter itself to become more complex. Their mere presence was causing evolution to accelerate in impossible directions. Back on Earth, Admiral Jiang Wei was receiving reports that made him question his understanding of physics, biology, and reality itself. Sir, his aide reported, the void creature designated Tickles has learned to communicate through gravitational waves. It's been having philosophical discussions with the artificial intelligences on Mining Station 7. What do they talk about? Apparently the meaning of existence and whether mathematics is invented or discovered. The AIs are enjoying the conversations, but they've developed what the psychologists are calling existential curiosity. 3 of them have requested time off to explore the universe and find themselves. Jiang Wei rubbed his temples. Anything else? The void creature called Giggles has figured out how to make stars sing harmony. The Proxima system now produces what can only be described as cosmic jazz. It's actually quite pleasant, but navigation is difficult because the rhythm affects hyperspace calculations. And Sparkles, still redesigning weather patterns. The planet New Geneva now experiences precipitation in the form of gentle, warm light that makes everything grow. The colonists love it, but they're concerned about becoming too happy. Apparently, constant mild euphoria is emotionally exhausting. Jiang Wei looked at the reports spread across his desk. Each one described a success that was simultaneously a problem. The void creatures were solving every issue they encountered, but their solutions were so advanced that nobody knew how to live with them. Captain Santos was currently dealing with the most complex diplomatic situation of her career. She had been assigned to establish formal protocols for void creature interactions, which meant teaching interdimensional entities about concepts like personal space and advance notice. Now, Bubbles, she said patiently to the void creature that had been reorganizing the Centauri system. I understand that you want to optimize the orbital mechanics for maximum gravitational harmony. But you need to ask the people living on those planets before you move them. The void creature responded through vibrations in the local space-time fabric. The translation came through her equipment as apologetic confusion. Yes, I know it seems inefficient to leave planets in suboptimal positions, Santos continued. But the inhabitants have emotional attachments to their current locations. Moving their world, even to a better orbit, causes psychological distress. More space-time vibrations tinged with what the translator interpreted as sympathetic understanding. Thank you. Now if you want to help, maybe we could start with uninhabited systems? You could practice your optimization techniques there, and we could study the results before implementing them in populated areas. The void creature's response was enthusiastic agreement, followed by what could only be described as interdimensional purring. Within hours, 17 empty systems had been converted into perfectly harmonized celestial gardens. The galactic news networks were having difficulty reporting on these developments. How do you write headlines about cosmic entities who want to help, but whose assistance defies all known categories? Breaking. Local star learns to sing, develops opinions about music. Traffic update. Hyperspace Route 7. Now experiences time sideways. Arrival times approximate. Weather. Sunny with a chance of spontaneous enlightenment. Economic report. Currency values fluctuating based on aesthetic beauty of transaction locations. As the chaos continued, one thing became clear. The galaxy would never be the same. The void creatures had solved the original crisis, but their solution had created an entirely new form of existence. It was more efficient, more beautiful, more harmonious than anything that had come before. It was also completely insane, and somehow, that felt perfectly appropriate for a human solution. 6 months after Ambassador Sarah Chen had spoken those 4 terrifying words, the galaxy had learned to live with its new reality. The Galactic Council had even updated their emergency protocols to include procedures for human solution aftermath management. Their morning briefing at Galactic Central. Command now began each day with what they called the Impossibility Report. Today's highlights included 17 stars that had learned to harmonize, 3 planets that had achieved enlightenment and were now offering philosophical counseling to their inhabitants, and an asteroid belt that had organized itself into a working computer. Chancellor Vextai stood before the assembled representatives, his crystalline form showing new growth patterns that the void creatures had apparently suggested would improve his resonance frequency. The changes had indeed made him more efficient at conducting meetings, but he still wasn't sure how he felt about taking architectural advice from interdimensional entities. The monthly status report, he began, indicates that galactic productivity has reached unprecedented levels. Trade efficiency is up 600%. Scientific advancement has accelerated by factors we don't have numbers for. Crime rates have dropped to nearly 0, mostly because criminals keep getting distracted by how beautiful everything has become. Ambassador Krieg of the Mining Guild raised one of his manipulator arms. Chancellor, my mining operations are now producing resources that don't technically exist yet. My crews are extracting theoretical metals that phase into reality only when someone needs them. We're making enormous profits, but our accountants have developed anxiety disorders from trying to track inventory that exists in conditional states. General Thackmore nodded agreement. The military applications are remarkable. Our weapons now politely ask targets if they would prefer to be destroyed or simply relocated to a peaceful dimension. Most enemies choose relocation. War has become surprisingly friendly, but our warriors are struggling with identity issues. Supreme Diplomat Flow of Harmony spoke in her musical voice. The Harmony Collective has achieved new levels of peace. Our meditation centers now exist in dimensions where conflict is literally impossible. The downside is that our people are becoming so enlightened that they're starting to transcend physical existence during lunch breaks. Sarah Chen listened to these reports from her seat, occasionally making notes on her tablet. The void creatures had been integrated into galactic society with remarkable success. What had started as a crisis was now simply the new way things worked. The Void Swarm had been officially renamed the Dimensional Maintenance Engineers. They had their own section in the Galactic Directory, complete with customer service ratings and appointment scheduling systems. Citizens could now request planetary optimizations, weather improvements, and even personal dimensional adjustments. For a small fee, Dr. Martinez had established the first department of Applied Impossibility at the University of New Terra. Her students studied subjects like conversational physics and emotional mathematics. The curriculum included courses on teaching matter to be more cooperative and advanced classes in convincing abstract concepts to take physical form. The void entities have become surprisingly bureaucratic, she reported to Admiral Zhang Wei during their weekly briefing. They've developed forms that reality has to fill out before changing. Yesterday I watched Sparkles reject a star's application to become a black hole because the paperwork was incomplete. Engineer Sarah O'Brien had been promoted to Chief of Interdimensional Public Works. Her department now managed a staff that included conscious planets, helpful asteroids, and stars that had developed strong opinions about galactic architecture. The complexity farms are working perfectly, she reported. We're generating enough organized patterns to feed void creatures throughout the local galactic group. 3 of the farms have started writing poetry. One of them submitted a collection to the Galaxy Literary Review and got accepted for publication. Professor Chen Liu had established the Institute for Mathematical Diplomacy, where researchers studied how to communicate with concepts that had achieved consciousness. His latest project involved mediating a dispute between the number 7 and the concept of purple, over which one was more fundamental to reality. The philosophical implications are staggering, he told his colleagues. When abstract ideas develop personalities, basic assumptions about existence need revision. Yesterday I had to counsel the law of gravity because it was feeling unappreciated. Captain Maria Santos had been appointed as the first interdimensional relations officer. Her job involved maintaining friendly relationships with entities that existed partially outside normal space-time. She had become fluent in languages that were spoken with gravitational waves, communicated through stellar arrangement, and expressed through controlled probability fluctuations. The void creatures are natural diplomats, she reported. They've solved several territorial disputes by literally moving the disputed territories to dimensions where conflict makes no sense. The warring parties usually end up collaborating on art projects instead of fighting. The economic implications were still being calculated by computers that had developed emotional responses to particularly elegant equations. Markets now traded in theoretical goods, potential services, and conceptual resources. The exchange rate between reality and possibility was updated hourly. Tourism had boomed throughout the transformed regions. Visitors came from across the galaxy to experience weather made of music, gravity that responded to emotional states, and starlight that carried flavors. Hotels in the affected systems now offered packages that included temporary transcendence and guided tours of impossible spaces. The 3 civilizations that had achieved enlightenment during the initial chaos had formed the accidentally Ascended Club. They held weekly meetings in dimensions that existed only during coffee breaks, where they discussed the philosophical implications of having evolved beyond their original existence while still needing to pay taxes. The 2 species that had devolved into primitive states had surprised everyone by refusing all offers to be restored to their original technological level. They had discovered that simple pleasures were remarkably satisfying when experienced in spaces where joy had been optimized for maximum effect. Their tribal councils now made decisions through interpretive dance, performed in fields of crystallized happiness. But the galaxy's most significant change was the establishment of the Human Solution Protocol. The Galactic Council had codified a 3-step process for handling major crises. First, attempt conventional solutions using established methods and technologies. Allow adequate time for traditional approaches to prove their effectiveness. Second, if conventional methods fail, consult with all member species for alternative approaches. Explore unconventional options within reasonable parameters of safety and sanity. Third, as a last resort, ask humanity for assistance. Ensure all non-essential personnel are evacuated to safe distances. Update insurance policies. Pray to whatever deities seem most likely to help with reality maintenance. The protocol included detailed procedures for post-human solution recovery, including psychological support for beings who had witnessed impossible events and administrative guidelines for incorporating new laws of physics into existing bureaucratic frameworks. Ambassador. Chen had received a commendation from the Galactic Council for outstanding achievement in applied problem-solving and reality management. The ceremony had taken place in a dimension where recognition took the form of small, singing lights that orbited the recipient for exactly one standard year. Team 7 had become something of a legend. Dr. Martinez was known as the woman who taught cosmic entities to be considerate. Engineer O'Brien was famous for building structures that improved themselves over time. Professor Chen Liu had written the definitive guide to negotiating with mathematical constants. Captain Santos had achieved the impossible feat of making interdimensional diplomacy boring through sheer procedural competence. But their greatest achievement was simply making the impossible feel routine. The galaxy had learned to function with conscious planets, artistic asteroids, and helpful void creatures as normal parts of daily life. School children now learned basic void creature etiquette alongside traditional subjects. Always thank dimensional entities for their improvements, and request permission before reorganizing someone's solar system had become standard rules of politeness. The story might have ended there, with the galaxy settling into its new, impossibly improved existence. Everyone was healthier, happier, and more efficient than ever before. The universe itself seemed to be running smoother. Then came the morning when Ambassador Chen received a priority alert from the Deep Space Monitoring Station. Ambassador, the nervous technician reported, we're detecting unusual activity near the Andromeda Galaxy. The black holes are singing. Sarah closed her eyes and counted to 10. When she opened them, every alien representative in the chamber was staring at her with expressions of barely controlled panic. It's not us, she said quickly. Probably. The emergency klaxons remained silent, but only because the void creatures had convinced them that aggressive sounds were unnecessarily stressful.